On this edition of Independent Sources, Medicare Mystery. Why are immigrants losing out when it comes to Medicare benefits?
The Age Equality Agenda. Advocates for the elderly rally senior citizens to make their voices heard during the upcoming election season.
And Black Hollywood Revival. Does a bumper crop of films in 2013 truly signal a change in Hollywood? Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Vianora Vinca.
And I'm Gary Pierre-Pierre. A recent study has lent even more credence to the notion that immigrants are not the strain on the U.S.'s economy and social services that some anti-immigrant pundits would have you believe.
The study, conducted by researchers at Harvard and Hunter College, find that immigrants, both legal and undocumented, contribute more money to Medicare than they get out of it.
One of the report's co-authors, Dr. Stephanie Woolhandler, joined me via Skype to talk about some of the study's findings. Dr. Woolhandler, why was this study done?
The study was done because as a physician, I had seen a lot of immigrant patients who were not getting the health care they needed to stay healthy. Many of them were afraid to come in to see the doctor and suffered really pretty serious health consequences as a result.
And so far, what's the response been like regarding the study?
Well, our study showed that immigrants contributed much more to the Medicare Trust Fund than was paid out on their behalf. And the response has been huge. The fellow who I did the work with has been invited to talk to the consul from Mexico. They're talking about having her come down to Mexico to talk about this. And then there's been several editorials in newspapers, including conservative newspapers like the Boston Herald and the New Orleans Times-Picayune, pointing out that immigrants are in fact contributing more to the healthcare system than they're taking out.
This is not the first study of its kind looking at the contribution of immigrants in general to the population in the United States. Why is there this persistent view that immigrants are taking away or burdening our society when survey after survey shows that it's not quite the case?
Well, there have been those surveys showing that immigrants put in more to the economy than they take out, but those surveys are not very well known. Ours was actually the first study that looked at contributions to the Medicare Trust Fund. There have been several studies about contributions to Social Security, and both our study on the Trust Fund and the earlier studies on Social Security showed the same thing, that immigrants are subsidizing the native born, that they're putting much more into these retirement-based systems than they're taking out. Now, that's for two reasons. The first reason is that the immigrant population is mostly young, working-age people, and any retirement-based system relies on large numbers of working-age people to support smaller numbers of older people. And, of course, that's exactly what immigration does, is it brings in healthy, young workers. The other aspect of this is less fair, to be honest, and that is when the immigrants themselves get older, they get sick, they may not be able to get the benefits that they've been paying for all along. And certainly if you are not in the United States legally, you're not eligible for any benefits under Medicare or Social Security. But even if you've been here for 4.5 years, let's say, legally, you're still not eligible until you've been in the country legally for 5 years. And in addition, you have to have about 10 years of documented contributions to Social Security and Medicare. So it turns out many immigrants contribute, they work, they pay their payroll taxes, and yet when they need medical care or need help paying for their retirement, they're not eligible for those benefits. And that's not fair.
We're talking about both documented and undocumented immigrants, right?
Absolutely. In our data, we were able to look at citizens and non-citizens. Now, it's believed that the non-citizen group is about half documented folks but about half of the non-citizens, or about 11 million people, are undocumented. Nonetheless, when undocumented people go to work, they pay payroll taxes. They often pay under an invalid Social Security number, either when they borrowed from someone else or when they bought the card on the street, if you will, and it's a totally invalid number. It turns out an employer under federal law has to get a Social Security number from the employee. So payroll taxes are paid by essentially everyone. Federal law does not require the employer to figure out if it's a valid Social Security number or not.
Just give them a number.
Yeah, you can just give a number or a fake card that you bought on the street. I think they cost about $500. But then what happens is you're working as an immigrant, you're paying payroll taxes. You can pay payroll taxes all your life, but none of them are credited to you, and you're never able to become eligible for Medicare when you get too old or sick to work. And that's not fair. It's not fair from even economic. It's a human rights violation, in my view, to deny health care to anyone who needs it. I'm a doctor, and I believe everyone has a right to care. So I'm mostly concerned about this as a human rights violation. We should never be denying health care to anyone, whether they're immigrant or not. But it's also, what this recent study showed was it's also unfair from a strictly economic point of view.
Speaking of the study, I know we know the major point of this report. What are some of your other findings from this report?
Well, mostly we just looked at how much people paid into Medicare in the form of taxes and how much they took out in the form of medical care. And those were really the major findings. It involved a substantial amount of economic analysis, and we did this not for 1 year, but for 8 years in a row. And we found that the immigrant subsidy to native-born people was constant. That is, it's not changing. Every year we looked at about $14 billion more was put into the Medicare Trust Fund than was paid out by immigrants, than was paid out on behalf of immigrants. So we found that this was a relatively constant phenomena. We further predict this is going to go on at least until 2060, that immigrants will be paying in much more to Medicare than is paid out on their behalf. And of course, what's true for Medicare is almost certainly true for Social Security as well, because the funding of Medicare and Social Security are almost identical. They're based on payroll tax.
Now, do you expect your report to be used by immigration rights advocates to press their case for the healthcare reform and immigration reform bills?
Well, I certainly hope so. I feel we need a debate that's informed by facts and not by prejudices. And the facts are that immigrants come to the United States to work. They often work for decades. They contribute to taxes, to Social Security, to Medicare. That's actually a fact. And immigration policy and health policy needs to be based on facts. I think immediately we need to make sure that anyone living in the United States is eligible for medical care. So if you're otherwise eligible for Medicaid, you're living in the United States, we need to be giving people Medicaid without regard to immigration status. Similarly, for Medicare, for private insurance, if you're otherwise eligible and the only problem is your immigration status, we need to be ignoring immigration status, frankly, as a matter of human rights. Over the long run, what we really need is a single payer national health insurance. This is everybody in, nobody out, a kind of expanded and improved Medicare for All program that would cover all Americans, immigrants, and native-born for all the medical care that they need.
Well, on that note, let's leave it there. Thank you very much, Dr. Wool-Lendler.
My pleasure.
Still to come, encouraging the elderly to rock the vote.
Before that, here's Sarah Pizon with some other news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic and community media. Much of the local Polish media is following the story of a still unnamed man who a New Jersey hospital reportedly dropped off at a hospital in Bolesławiec, Poland. Nowy Dziennik reports that an ambulance dropped off the 67-year-old outside of the institution, whose name translates as the Hospital of the Healthcare Team of Bolesławiec. The county hospital is located near the patient's last known residence in Poland. The local papers picked up the story from the Polish network TVN24 that reported that Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital in New Brunswick had reached out to Polish hospital officials to take care of the man who was homeless and uninsured. The station reports that both institutions had not settled on the correct paperwork to have the man transferred, but the U.S. hospital rented a plane and private ambulance, then dropped him off and left. The Polish consulate in New York says there will be a full investigation into the matter. From El Diario La Prensa, New York City's poorest families are expected to be hardest hit by federal budget cuts that are going to impact what people can buy on food stamps. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, currently assists an estimated 1.5 million city residents. The budget cuts means a loss of $130 each month. Councilwoman Melissa Mark Viverito says there is a major concern among working-class families in the East Harlem district. Food centers in her district work at full capacity. Carla Lines reports that Muslim New Yorkers and civil liberty advocates are suing the city and the NYPD over the police surveillance program of the Muslim community. The ACLU, New York Civil Liberties Union, and the CLEAR Project are filing the suit. The plaintiffs say the program violates the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause by violating freedom of protection. The group also says the program has lasting and damaging effect on the day-to-day lives of Muslims in New York. Gentrification in Bushwick, Brooklyn is coming through on the M train. Brooklyn Bureau reports that since the line was rerouted through Midtown Manhattan in 2010, the average rent on a two-bedroom apartment has increased by about $454. Much of the change has come in South Bushwick, near the Central Avenue station. That's where the MTA reports the largest increase in passengers for the 2011-2012 period. Reaction to this has been mixed. Some residents have welcomed the new restaurants and amenities that have come along with the new route and neighbors, while Community Board 4 has drafted a letter to local political leaders asking that they preserve affordable housing in the neighborhood. And finally, incumbent councilman at large, Rolando Ramos Lavaro Jr., has made history by becoming the first Filipino-American to win a full-term elective position in Jersey City government. Lavaro originally won the seat in 2011 after councilman at large Willie Flood retired. His victory is being attributed to his ability to rally the nearly 20,000 strong Filipino Americans in the area to his side. Previous Phil-Am candidates had run under different platforms, thus splitting the vote. That from the Filipino Reporter. Those are just a few headlines from the ethnic and community media. Back to Gary and Villanara.
There's been more than $50 million cut from the Department for the Aging since 2008. That, along with the fact that an estimated 1 in 3 people over the age of 60 in the city live in poverty, has some elderly advocates raising their voices as the 2013 election season ramps up.
I sat down with Bobby Sackman of the Council of Senior Centers and Services. We spoke about the state of New York City's seniors, as well as her organization's efforts to get the elderly out to rock the vote. Bobby, it's great having you back on the program. Last time you were here, you talked about the hidden, as you called it, widespread crisis of elderly abuse, one of the many issues facing the elderly population of New York. Tell us briefly about that and the other issues that you see the elderly facing.
Well, just a quick update, and thank you for having me back. About 120,000 older New Yorkers in the city are experiencing some form of elder abuse that goes unreported. It's behind closed doors. So where we're at this moment in time is the city budget has $800,000 that gets caught up in the budget dance every year for elder abuse services, so we're fighting to win that back. And on the state level, we got a bill introduced in the Senate and the Assembly that would strengthen the bank's capacity to report elder abuse and give them liability protection so they don't have to be worried. And the important part about that is if they discover financial elder abuse, somebody stealing somebody's money, they can move in more quickly and stop the bleeding of the money.
What other issues do you see the elderly facing?
Well, what we've tried to do, especially because we're obviously in a big election year with a new mayor and other people running for public office, is we wanted to put together an age equality agenda, as we called it, because the elderly have a wide array of needs of living comfortably in New York City. So there's funding through the Department for the Aging, and that funds the services like senior centers and Meals on Wheels and transportation and a whole wide variety, case management for homebound people and elder abuse. And it's been cut over the years, and every year we're caught up in that budget dance. And making city policy by a budget dance is not a way to make city policy. So we're hoping to get the funding stabilized and move ahead. So there is that, but there is also affordable housing needs, there's transportation needs, there's hunger and poverty, very serious food insecurity needs out there among the elderly. There's wanting to support family caregivers. So there's a whole wide realm, and we're also trying to show that older adults, you don't reach a certain age and live off in a silo somewhere, that they're part of families and they're part of communities, but all too often their issues are not discussed.
So the organization that you work for, the Council of Senior Centers and Services, is a nonpartisan organization
Yes.
that neither supports or opposes any political party or
Right.
candidates.
Right.
And it came up with a questionnaire for political candidates
Right.
to assess each candidate's policy goals with regards to the needs of the older population.
Right.
Tell us more about this questionnaire.
The questionnaire, as you've said, it's really an educational tool, and it's meant to shape policy of the new administration, new elected officials. It's not to endorse anybody. And we're trying, again, to show that there's a broad array of these services or needs. And so we came up with a series of about 10 categories with a lot of questions. And we're posting all the responses up on our website. We've gotten back from the mayoral candidates so far, the major ones, we've gotten Quinn and Thompson back so far. Of course, we're hoping that everybody, we've invited both Republican and Democratic candidates to answer. We've gotten back many of the borough president candidates, like in Manhattan and Queens, where there are real races. And we got one of the public advocates back. So we're still pushing them to do it. And then we get the word out across the city through alerts to older adults themselves. Go to the website, read what's up there. You can pick and choose whatever issue interests you. That's how we've set it up. And we're also trying to send information around to senior centers and such programs to educate older adults, because candidates love to come through the senior centers. Hi, I'm here, vote for me. Well, we want more of a dialogue that says, these are the needs we're looking at, and we want you to take that seriously.
So give us a sense of some of the responses that you have received from the candidates that you mentioned.
Well, I think to date, the ones we've gotten, they're obviously going to show that they're supportive of these issues. And I think it's been based a lot on their track record, which makes sense. In the terms of, this speaker can talk about that she's helped restore funds and that she does see the need for affordable housing for seniors, that rent regulation is a part of it and other things. Mr. Thompson, when he was comptroller, he would speak out against cuts that were going on. So he was able to talk about, again, the needs of the Department for the Aging and other services that older adults need, and that they would include in their administration, that this wouldn't be sidelined, that this would be central to their administration. And the borough presidents are a little bit different because they're based just on their own borough.
Over 50% of older New Yorkers are minorities. How much awareness on the part of the political candidates have you seen on this aspect, and how much interest in tailoring policy to serve the needs of minority elderly?
That's actually a really good question, because I don't know how widespread it's acknowledged that, and it's been at least 10 years or more, that the population shifted to over 50% minority, and it's just reflecting the rest of New York City, plus all the immigrants that come in, and many of these programs are serving immigrants. And so I haven't seen, a you know, emphasis or making, you know, a priority on how do we serve older adults of whether it's various ethnic groups or cultural groups from perhaps other countries and their linguistic needs. It's an area that does need much work. And then there's a thing that we talk about back at the office, I guess, cultural competency of dealing with older people. It's a different, you know, first of all, if you're talking about people in their, let's say, 70s, 80s and above, it's a different generation. And so, you know, as it, you know, time moves on, but people communicate differently. So if someone is just going to talk about, you know, how do we do something online, or how do we, you know, do something that involves running around the city, it might not resonate. And there's a way people hear things. And so there is something to be learned about how is it best to communicate with older people. And then even people a little bit younger, like even myself, you know, people in their 50s and their 60s, it can still be different than, you know, how somebody 30 or 35 even or younger might communicate or look at the issues. So there's a lot to be learned about not only wanting to take on these issues, but how to communicate. And I don't think that effort has quite been made out there. So.
Now, you're a native New Yorker.
Born and bred.
Was there a time when New York City was a good place to grow old in?
I think it's harder to grow old here now. First of all, the city is so expensive. You know, every time the rent goes up in rent regulation, it really affects older adults who live in rent regulation. People don't move, and a fixed income is a fixed income. So I think the expense of rent, of food, and the cost of living here has just become much harder. In some areas, there has been a change in how communities live and people being more isolated now. So I think it can make it difficult. But on the other side, there are some services out there if people can avail themselves of it, and some more awareness. So, you know, it's a little bit of a mixed bag, but it's a real struggle to grow old here. It really is. 1 out of 3 people over the age of 60 in New York City lives in poverty. That's less than $10,000 a year. And thousands more live a little bit above it, but not, you know, they're not doing well financially, so.
In closing, I'd just like to mention that your organization, the Council of Senior Centers and Services, will host a mayoral forum on July 11th. Bobby Sackman, thank you very much for being in studio with us today.
You. Okay.
When we come back, is there a real renaissance for Black filmmakers in Hollywood?
And finally, Black filmmakers have always complained that they struggle to find a steady place in Hollywood. But recently, the New York Times declared 2013 as a breakout year for Black films, with a wave of movies coming to the big screen.
Still, there are critics who say it will take more than a good year of films to bridge the racial divide in Hollywood. Abby Ishola spoke to independent film director Tony Clomax about where Black filmmakers stand in Hollywood.
Tony, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So 2013 has been described as this breakout year for Black films by the New York Times.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Do you think this is a breakout year for Black films?
You know, there's so many feature films that are being released this year that are considered Black films, either because of the topic, the cast, or the director. And I think it's in this 6-month gap time frame that these 10 films are going to be released. So, I mean, that's a major accomplishment. It's a major accomplishment, and I think it's due to the fact that the quality of filmmaking is rising, as well as the technology. And so there's all these stories that, you know, are being told, and it's a business. It's a business, and I think Hollywood is looking at it, well, you know, there are these markets that need to be satisfied.
Well, do you think this is going to change the course of Black films? Like, will we be seeing more Black films going forward?
Definitely. I mean, without a doubt. Without a doubt, you're going to see more films, because the thing is, like I said, because of the technology, there's a lot of competition. Okay, there are a lot of platforms out here that filmmakers can have their stories told and be seen, by the targeted audience. So I think Hollywood knows this, and it's just like, well, why are we missing out on this opportunity? So let's get the best films and let's put them out here, whether they're, cast with stars or up and coming actors. What it comes down to is the story and the quality way of it being filmed.
People have been saying that indie films are leading to this big new wave in Black films, breaking through in the mainstream. How important do you think indie filmmakers are to mainstream Black films?
I mean, it's crucial. And I think whether it's Black films or whatever films, indie film, I think drive the market. Because in Hollywood, the blockbusters, that's what it's all about. And I think the statistics is maybe 300 films a year, really get promoted and put out there. So, but there's tens of thousands of films that are made every year. And, so these stories are being told and is being put out there. And there's a market. There's basically a market for it.
Some critics say there have been moments like this before for Black films, but it never really led to Black films being included in Hollywood as much as they're saying it would be now. What do you think of that?
Well, when you look back and you look at, say, in the 70s with blaxploitation films, it was in a genre of its own, but they were the urban stories, comedies, dramas, action. They ran the gamut. Then you had the 90s where, John Singleton came out with Boys in the Hood. The next thing you know, there were all these, films that were like that,
yeah.
About crime and gang banging and drugs. And then in between there, you had some love stories told. And then all of a sudden, just like that, these films were forgotten. And I think now, with all these Black films being distributed, they're such diverse films. And I think that's the key, is not to just go after one genre.
So what do you think of the New York Times coverage of this new wave of Black films overall?
I mean, listen, it's nice to have a major publication like the New York Times to put that story out there, to generate dialogue. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that, some other publications, maybe smaller ones who've been covering those stories all along, might say, well, okay, we've been talking about this, for years. So why all of a sudden, just because the New York Times puts it out there, it's this major thing to talk about.
It's a big deal.
Right. Yeah. And I can understand, smaller publications, feeling slighted for that. And it's, there's no getting around that. There's no getting around that at all. So it's just like you just take advantage of it, but the key thing is to continue talking about, Black cinema, to talk about independent film and to get those stories out there, because that's what it's going to take. It's the constant talk, the constant promoting of it, and giving new filmmakers, up and coming filmmakers such as myself, an opportunity, to be heard and to be seen.
Tony Clomax, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned.
We invite you to continue watching us throughout the summer, when we will air new episodes once a month.
Till next time, be independent-minded.